On this show, we're driven by curiosity. We want to chart a path forward. Best people, best conversations. We're on a journey and it's just getting started. All right. We are back. We are live. I'm Jack Murphy. This is the Jack Murphy Live Show. And today I have got a good friend, an amazing scientist, a homesteader, a feather ruffler, someone who played a small but significant part in our early response to Corona. Joe Norman, Dr. Joe Norman?
Technically, yeah, although I never ask anyone to say that. It's a bit embarrassing, to be honest. It's not a real doctor.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Dr. Joe Norman, applied complexity scientist, a complexity scientist, a homesteader, a great guy, a wonderful follow on Twitter. You guys can follow him at Normonics. Please check him out. He is definitely good for some info and for some laughs all along the way. Joe, I'm so glad that you could join me today, man. How are things going up there in New Hampshire, my friend?
Oh, likewise. Thanks for having me. Things are going pretty good. Life on the homestead is always, the unexpected comes up all the time. We just dealt with a little flash flood. There's a brook that runs by our house. Our house is like an old mill property. And the thing flash flooded one night. We had kind of record rain in July and took out a bridge and threatened part of the house, which we had to scramble and get fixed up. So that was pretty wild. But other than that, things are pretty stable and good here. So,
dude, you're living the homestead rescue. You're living homestead rescue every single day, basically. Are you the Rainey family just yet?
Oh, no. I mean, it would be great if they could show up and help us out with some things and stuff like that. Those guys are awesome. And what's the daughter's name?
Misty.
Misty. She's so handy. Misty.
Yeah, dude, she's awesome.
She's amazingly handy. I know, it's so cool.
She's one of my favorite characters on that show.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, maybe one of my kids will be the next Marty. I don't think it's a multi-generational project here.
Right, indeed. For you guys that don't know, Joe is not only on the cutting edge of science and math and complexity and understanding the world, but he also is a homesteader. Bought some property up in New Hampshire. He's cultivating the land, and it's been great to watch him grow and see the new initiatives come to life. The chickens and the chicken, what do you call them? Chicken tractors?
Yeah, we get chicken tractors. They're pretty much just, boxes that you drag around with chickens inside, and they shit all over the ground, and that's nice for the ground. It's nice closing loops and building fertility, things like that.
Yeah, it's awesome. A lot of people in our sphere talk about homesteading, talk about localist living, talk about, separating from the big system, separating from the Leviathan. And you, sir, you're doing it, but you're doing it in a way that I find really intriguing, which is at the same time as you're doing the homesteading, dealing with the soil and the grass and the seasons and the low frequency vibrations of the earth, as you told me once. But you're also still totally tapped in to the online universe. You are a teacher, an educator. Tell us a little bit about your educational work that you do, because the way I see it, what you offer is the future of education. It is a selected choice that people make to work with a world-leading expert to learn something that's going to be useful in their life. So just give us a brief rundown on what you're doing with your complexity education.
Sure. So I'm running, it's looking about 2 times a year now that I'm running a cohort-based course. The jargon has sort of evolved into. So live, synchronous, a couple times a week. It's really, I kind of designed it after a college course, sort of a semester-long kind of experience. So that's an introduction to complexities, like sort of complexity science and applied complexity, which I see those things as sort of building on top of one another, but applied complexity really looks different than other applied sciences, because the things that you take away from studying complexity and complex systems are pretty hard hitting in terms of what you can actually do to apply things in the real world and what you can't do, crucially. So that course has that kind of arc where you start with all the basic foundations of complexity science. You basically learn about what you can't know, what you can't do. That's the most important lesson from that. And then you go on from there. So how do you actually manage in the world where there's so much uncertainty, so much unpredictability? What are some methodologies to go about thriving in the world then. And so that's running again starting in September next month through the winter, and then I'll schedule another one. But thinking about expanding the course offerings into some more deeply technical course offerings, maybe some introduction to modeling and simulation, get people's hands a little dirtier, things like that. But that's where it is now. I kicked off the first one pretty much at the front end of COVID, saw the whole situation unfolding, said, well, this is something I've been thinking about doing for a little while. It seems like a good time. People are going to be sitting at home a lot, I'm thinking. So it's been really great so far. And on top of the course itself, what's been great is developing a network of like-minded people who really, like you said, there's sort of a self-selection process. These are people who are seeking this kind of thing out in a world of many, many, many options. And so the community that's been developing sort of the various cohorts starting to interact with one another has been amazing. And different things like book clubs have spawned off, and just I think people have gotten some jobs through this network, lots of stuff like that. So it's been really cool, and looking forward to seeing where it goes.
Where can people find that?
That's at appliedcomplexity.io. And if you click on education, you'll see information about that course. And I think there's maybe 10 slots open for the fall session.
That is outstanding, man. Joe's living one of our mantras within the Liminal Order, which is get off of the networks you want off of and onto the networks you want onto. It's no longer good enough to say get off the grid. Nope. Can't just get off the grid. You got to get off of this grid and get onto that one. And the way you're doing it, by being at home with your family in the earth, working towards that self-sustenance there on the homestead, and then at the same time engaged with leading thinkers and students on cutting edge technology and scientific issues, and pushing the envelope in terms of people's education and building new education models, and creating your own network, which again is another one of our mottos, which is every man a network, because we want everybody to understand the power of networks and how we have to replace the institutions which have all been captured and corrupted, all the things that gave us meaning, security, safety, support, guidance, direction, protection, all these things. They're now turned against us, and we can't, I don't think there's any replacing them or modify, what's the word? Reforming them.
Reforming them, yeah.
Yeah, there's no reforming them. There's just building something in their place. And these are these kind of networks. And Joe, it's really awesome to see you living the life on both ends, and a great example for everyone where you can be a homesteader and a shit poster on Twitter. It's really incredible. Good job.
That's right. They go together. One of the beautiful things here is I don't have cell service. So I walk out of the house to do some work on the land, and I'm actually in a different world. I can't even pick up my phone and dive back in. And so, for people like me, who maybe there's a little bit of an addictive quality to social media, something like that, it's really nice actually to have that very clean boundary, that clean break where I step outside, I'm off. And, I'm kind of hoping that lasts around here, that we actually push back on a 5G tower that was supposed to go in on the hill over there. And we've delayed that significantly. We'll see if we've actually canceled it. We'll find out. So it's nice and it's interesting. I do think that I'm kind of doing what one can do right now as sort of an individual and as a family to do what you're describing, kind of both in the world and online. I'm thinking that as far as networks go, where we should move to in the future, and I think you're seeing this organically start to happen, including in your Liminal Order network, is rather than think of the network as networked individuals, you start to localize, have communities that are local, and those are networked. So the network isn't networked individuals. I mean, of course, individuals are involved, but networked communities, actually.
Yes.
I think that's a real possibility of developing parallel institutions and other systems to switch on to really exists, because trying to go it alone, pretty tough.
Yeah, no, indeed. They want us isolated because we are communal animals, and when you're not in a community, you're suffering, you're hurt, you're spiritually impacted, monetarily, financially, security, physical security, in every which way. Your life is diminished when you don't have connection to a community that supports you, believes in you, shares your worldview, and wants to be of service, like wants to help each other. And that's one of the things about the LO I'm most proud of, is that we've been able to, instill an energy within the LO about service to each other. That's like one of our main values. We're here to help each other because as we grow stronger, everyone in the network grows stronger.
Absolutely.
So one, I want to give guys out there just who may not know you, just one little anecdote to just for them to get an idea of the impact that some of your work has had. Can you talk us through the study and the letter about China and international travel and the beginning of Corona and your work with Nassim Taleb and et cetera? Just real brief, but I want people to understand it. That we're talking to Joe Norman Homesteader, but we're also talking to somebody that's got a lot of influence out there in the world too, and actually knows what he's talking about. So give us the story on that one.
Sure. I mean, okay. So January 2020, I think we all kind of have that marked as a line that we kind of crossed into a new reality. Most people, though, didn't realize it was happening at the time. Most people thought it was, we've seen the SARS stuff come up. We've seen the swine flu stuff. It's just going to be another round of that. It's sort of a news cycle. It's going to come up. It's going to go back. But with respect to the way the globe is connected, regardless of whatever your beliefs are about the severity of COVID or even the reality of COVID, I mean, that's an absurd position to take. It's not real anymore, but it's real. But anyway, even if we are so connected now that it's very clear that pandemic is one of our greatest global risks, there's mechanisms built into ecosystems that will, if something goes very wrong, an extinction event can happen, but it's a local extinction. When you become very, very, very connected, as we are with these long range connections, you no longer have that sort of safety net of the local extinction event happening. You get a global extinction event. So this is a problem that I've been for quite a while now very tuned into and sensitive to. When I was at the New England Complex Systems Institute, we did some work around Ebola. There was 2014 or so, there was an Ebola flare up. And of course, everyone was doing all the wrong things and, risking spreading it and putting Ebola patients on planes and all this stuff. Fortunately, that didn't get, sort of as widespread as COVID. And if an Ebola type virus did, that would be absolutely horrendous. But so anyway, that's sort of the theoretical underpinning. So when January rolled around, start seeing the information coming through. And for me, the big signal was not, any of the videos or particular things that you saw come out of China, but that China had actually gone and locked down tens of millions of people. Here's the thing. They wouldn't do that. That's costly to them. That's costly to their economy. They don't want to do that. They want to manufacture things and sell them to the world. That's what they're interested in doing. So for them to take that step said that a very shrewd government decided that it's better for us to take this immediate economic hit and try to manage this thing than to try to kind of push through it. So to me, that was a huge signal. That was the huge signal. And so I reached out to a contact who was at the part of the executive branch at the time at the White House. I said, hey, what's going on? What are you hearing? Are people taking this seriously? Is there any plan of action? It was sort of like, hey, people are talking about it, but we're not taking it too seriously. We're just kind of looking at what's going on. And so, of course, I already had a collaboration with Nassim Taleb going around this idea of the non-naive precautionary principle, which essentially is around how do you actually differentiate when it's appropriate to take precautionary action, which can be costly or can forego certain potential benefits, but it's worth it because the risks you're facing are just so massive that just cut out that risk. There's a lot of places you should take risks. There's, we have to take risks. There's no life without risk. But there's certain kinds of risks that aren't worth taking. And one of those is a pandemic risk. And it's worth it to say, maybe this will turn out to be nothing, but better to kind of clamp things down now and see. So we wrote a paper that basically said that. We said, okay, look, there's something going on here. It's not nothing. It's contagious. It spreads itself, right? It's not the kind of thing like a car accident where if someone gets in a car accident, someone in California gets in a car accident, someone in DC doesn't get in a car accident because of that. Someone in California shows up with COVID. Well, guess what? Someone in DC might now get COVID because of them. So it's this kind of cascading and contagious type of dynamic that sort of indicates that something is a potential systemic risk. So we wrote a paper that said, what we should do now is stop macroscopic mobility, meaning like international flights. Might consider shutting down domestic flights. Bottom line is we should harden our borders to the greatest degree possible. And that might mean a full pause. That might mean quarantines on entry, these kinds of things, so that we can maintain normalcy as much as possible domestically. Pushed that as hard as we could. I said, and I even was on like Steve Bannon's podcast early on saying this. We got hooked up through that White House contact, and saying, look, what's going to happen is if we don't kind of take this seriously now at that macroscopic level, it's going to be in here. And it's going to be to a degree that we're not going to be able to manage it. And so what's going to happen? Well, the politicians are going to feel like they're left with very few options, and they're going to start locking down. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is that kind of stuff. Obviously, that didn't happen quite that way. There was the travel ban on China that went in February, but it was a bit too late and too lackluster. It should have been just stop the international flights. Now, why is that? Just like, 99 out of 100 answers to a question, money, right? There's money involved here. People don't want to lose their money. There's airline lobbies saying keep the flight going. There's the fucking World Health Organization saying keep the flights going, right? At that time, we were saying the World Health Organization is fucked up. Why are they saying that? Don't listen to them. But who do you listen to? You listen to the expert institutions, et cetera, et cetera. So that was pretty much what happened. We were able to influence enough to get that China flight. And my understanding from connects inside the White House was our paper was sort of the justification they needed to do that China travel ban. Should have done it everywhere. Later they did Italy, the EU, whatever, this and that, but it was too little too late at that point. And the big takeaway from a risk-taking perspective is buy insurance while it's cheap. Buy insurance while it's cheap. You might never use it. It was cheap. You might use it, and you'll be glad you had it. And now we're in this entire mess. And yes, it's been politicized. Yes, by both sides. It's just a shit show now. I barely even, like, in the past few days, because things have come back up, I've kind of re-offered commentary that I offered, 17 months ago, that no one seemed to, or not no one, but many people didn't seem to kind of pick up on. And now they're picking up on it. It's like, it's kind of too late. So anyway.
The bottom line is that if the world would have listened to Joe Norman in January of 2020, we might have avoided all kinds of this mess. And it's not that Joe Norman was just a guy yelling into the ether. It was a guy with a direct connection to the White House and to the president. If they only would have listened, we could have avoided some of this stuff, potentially.
And frankly, Steve Bannon was early, and Bannon was saying it. He was like, let's just, shut it down. Like, what are we doing right now?
Yeah. And I personally would have much rather shut down the borders, even regional travel in America, if it meant that everything local continued on as normal. Now, I haven't thought that position all the way through yet, but it rings true to me.
No, that's my view entirely. Basically, you have a nested set of borders at like smaller to larger scales. Your town has a boundary of some kind, county, your state, your region, your nation, etc. So, yeah, pretty much one of the things that's really a shame coming through this is that this has been so heavily politicized that we haven't even been able to kind of ask ourselves, okay, so what about the next one? Yeah. And, I'm not talking about Delta variant. I'm talking about something much worse.
Right.
It's going to happen. What is our lesson? How do we handle this? Do we handle it by saying no lockdowns, no lockdowns? Well, yeah, I'm, in this scenario, I'm also against lockdowns. However, there could be a virus that comes around where I might be pro fucking lockdown. Like, right. You got a zombie outbreak going, and some idiot is like, oh no, I'm going out, and he wants to go become a zombie and come back and bite you. Fuck that guy, right? So that's a lockdown. Yeah. So like this, it's a mess where we can't even talk about the viable tools to actually prevent this stuff. And I agree with you completely. Like, lockdown is the smallest border, and it says you can't leave, and that's like something to be avoided if you can. But like interregional travel, yeah, if you have one region that's infected and say others that aren't, yeah, keep the uninfected regions uninfected and then focus on the problem there and snuff it out there.
Yeah.
We need to figure out how to handle this stuff because the other option is basically a forced lockdown because a virus hits us that is so devastating that people are just like dropping dead. And this could be natural. This could be a bioweapon, you know.
Right. We're not going there right now, YouTube. Just kidding. But what's funny is what's interesting is we are not even in debrief stage yet. Like no one's head is clear enough to start analyzing what happened, what was good, what wasn't, what should we do in the future. We're too busy fighting about whether or not you need to wear a paper mask over your face when you walk 10 feet from the hostess table to your dining room table. Or as I heard the NIH guy last night say, parents of unvaccinated children, I recommend you wear your masks inside your home with your kids. I don't want to
I
make any
mean,
comments on this. We're just going to let that one go. But that is what the NIH said. We're in some crazy territory here.
all right, we'll keep you on YouTube.
Well, keep me on YouTube. I'm pussing out, guys. All right. Let's move on a little bit. I just wanted to establish that groundwork here. Joe knows what he's talking about. He is not an idiot. That's why we're talking. That's why we get along. Joe, you said something really interesting on Twitter last month. And as soon as you said it, I was like, dude, what is this? What does this mean? I want to know what this means. I'm going to read it. Oh, I should have been really slick and have it up in my mix here, but I don't. Modernity is the age of isolation. Isolation is the destruction of patterns. The destruction of patterns is the destruction of life itself. The mono-functional machine. Okay, Joe. Time to learn me up, dude. I want to get on your level. I want to know what that means.
Okay. Let's so this is really, I mean, this is a tweet that's essentially a distillation of complexity science, right? So what is complexity science all about? Well, complex systems are systems where there's a lot of pieces that interact in some way. And those interactions, this is the key to making a system, quote unquote, complex. Those interactions are non-trivial, meaning that if you looked at, say, piece A in isolation and you looked at piece B in isolation and you studied them for all of eternity and knew everything about A and B, you still wouldn't know or understand or be able to predict what happens when A and B start interacting. So the interaction is non-trivial. That's what that means. So the first piece to understand is that complex system science is all about the difference between the behavior of things when they're either in isolation or not. Now, almost everything in the real world is not in isolation. Isolation typically comes from an effort to isolate things from some kind of in an experiment. For instance, you might build a chamber. Imagine a physical experiment where you're building a chamber and you have a lot of insulation, right, to control, for instance, heat transferring through and changing the conditions. So in general, in the real world, things are not isolated, but all of the reductionist research and science that's been done for a few hundred years now, and it has come to be sort of the operating assumptions not only of scientists but of kind of mainstream culture and what I'd call the scientism that we subscribe to almost as a state religion. It doesn't understand that distinction I just described, that things in isolation behave differently than things when they're interacting. So maybe a more visceral example, imagine that this conversation that you and I are having. Imagine that instead of it being this conversation, I was just sitting in a room alone, talking how I'm talking and saying what I'm saying. Well, you'd say I was fucking nuts, right? So when we're together, we behave differently. We're greater than the sum of our parts. We're different than the sum of our parts. That's the main theme. So a lot of times this idea of isolation gets conflated with differentiation. So as an example, in your body, you have a heart and you have lungs, and they're both part of your cardiovascular system. They're clearly different. They're very much differentiated, but they're not in isolation. They interact in an important way. Now, if your heart went off to the office for work for the day while your lungs stayed home to watch the kids, that would change what your heart and your lungs do when you take them out of contact with one another. So that's basically what we've been doing in modernity is thinking we understand the function of something. Well, we understand the heart, we understand how that works, we understand the husband, we understand the wife. We can actually now isolate these variables, and we'll gain efficiency that way. We'll optimize the system. They don't have to be in contact, they don't have to be together anymore. So now in the example of the heart and the lungs, you separate them, well, they very quickly wither and die. So it's a very dramatic kind of lack of persistence. When it comes to, say, husband and wife, you can separate them and it seems like everything's fine. They're not just going to immediately perish, but you've changed something fundamental, and it's going to have effects. They might take a while to show up. They might look subtle at first, but they will show up. So modernity has been this big project of doing that, thinking we understand the function of a thing and then trying to optimize around that function, isolate a thing as much as possible, and we lose these sort of persistent things that are persistently in the presence of one another and the patterns that arise out of that. So I said also that isolation is the destruction of patterns. Where do patterns come from in the real world? It's not like an artist who has a canvas and starts painting, a pattern and putting this piece there and that piece there until it's a pattern. There's no one, not to get theological. So some might construe God this way, but in a scientific sense, there is not a painter. Instead, there is all of us making our own individual decisions, taking our own individual actions, and together, out of all those local interactions, patterns emerge at a higher level that no one is sort of constructing or putting into place or directing. So it's the interactions that allow the patterns to exist. Now, when I say life itself is made out of patterns, that's sort of the other the other fundamental piece to understand about complex systems, is that we're saying that interactions are important and non-trivial. Not only are interactions important and non-trivial, they are the stuff itself. It's not a sort of philosophy of substance first, like, oh, what's a person made of? Oh, they're atoms. Well, put that person in a blender, you still have the same pile of atoms, but the person's gone. So the thing is the pattern. And so life has to do with the patterns that are being enacted by the stuff, so to speak. The stuff itself is almost in some real sense secondary to the patterns. So when we start to isolate things, we start to destroy those patterns. There's nothing but patterns, and so you're destroying the life. And the patterns that we generate on collective scales are often very illegible. That's a word that comes from James C. Scott's book, Seeing Like a State, where he talks about this idea of legibility and illegibility. And basically, as we centralize states, they sought to be able to observe what's going on. To observe what's going on, they had to make things legible, write them down on tables and stuff like that. And in so doing, they had to destroy the patterns of the systems that they looked at, because those systems had a lot of stuff in them that they didn't know how to write down. They couldn't write down. And we've been on that trajectory in a massive way ever since the foundation of the modern state. So this is the general idea, is that we think because we don't see something in a direct way, or it's illegible for us, we don't quite understand what the patterns are, that it's like the patterns aren't even there or don't exist, when they're really, it's almost like we are naturally, we naturally as human beings form these kind of superorganisms where the community structure and the societal structure have all these important kinds of functional relationships to one another. The patterns they produce are such that the pattern can continue to persist in time, but we're destroying those. So how we persist as a collective is a big question without those patterns, and the answer might be we don't.
Tremendous amount of information there, Joe. My mind is going in a million different directions. One of the things I want to drill down on, what do you mean by modernity in particular here, and how does it create the isolation? But before you do that, I just want to relate how I see this working in my own life. So the liminal order is based on masculinity, brotherhood, and sovereignty. Okay. And we see those sort of building on each other. And there's characteristics of masculinity that make a masculine man. And then you get a bunch of masculine men together. They behave in a certain number of ways based on certain values that produces a brotherhood. And that brotherhood is conducive to producing sovereignty. Okay. And that is the sort of general philosophy of our values in the organization that we have. And the way I'm hearing this is to say you can be a man, but you can't be a brother unless you've got the interactions. And the interactions among men are the brotherhood, are the thing, right? A man in isolation is of no use to society or to sovereignty, but together, those interactions together, the patterns that emerge from people being together with these types of values and parameters, which we'll get to a little bit later, of behavior, they produce an outcome that is separate from the individual items. And without them being together and interacting, then the output doesn't occur. And for me, modernity, I've talked to Alexander Dugan. He's got a definition of modernity. Everybody's got a definition of modernity, but in this case, for me, I'm going to use it to mean sort of the anti-masculine, anti-feminine push from radical feminism and CRT and the whole thing. I think whether intuitively or specifically, they understood that if you destroy the component parts, then the interactions don't occur. And if the interactions don't occur, then this thing that they're after doesn't occur as well. But also you can then, even if the component parts still exist or persist, then if you destroy the interactions, the brotherhood of masculine men, then whatever their outcomes were that happened to take place by being together and interacting in certain circumstances, then that outcome doesn't happen either. And I think that we experiencing that as a nation, and that's my interpretation of a very personal reflection of what you're talking about. So am I on that? And then maybe go back and let's drill down on modernity and how does it create this isolation you're talking about?
So I love this example of a brother and then a brotherhood. So a brother is exactly what is a brother? It's a relational definition. So we can talk about relational properties in complex systems. And so a brother is a man, as you say, that has certain kinds of relationships, certain kind of interactions. So in the same way that the function of the heart is to pump blood, not to itself, ultimately yes to itself, but it needs to pump blood to the rest of the body. And so the when we say the function of the heart is to pump blood to the rest of the body, we have to look outside of the heart itself at its interactions. And so the man, if his function is to participate in the brotherhood, well, he's got to be in this context. It's actually a property that looks like it's a property of the man, but it's really a property of the system that's showing itself in the man. So I love that as an example. Let me just jump to the modernity stuff, or at least my working definition of it. I don't have a kind of broad political, socio-political definition. It's really about the process by which the artifacts of the world are generated, and it's this turn from bottom-up dynamics to top-down dynamics. And I alluded to some of that earlier when we were talking, when I was saying that we kind of looked, now we understand the function of the man is to make money and go and support the family that way. So he can go to the office 40 hours a week and he can commute, 20 hours a week or whatever it is. And so it's this idea that top-down design of patterns are always going to be insufficient when it comes to like ecosystems, very complex systems that have a lot of stuff going on, a lot of subtle functional interactions. The destruction of those kinds of relations and interactions in favor of what is believed to be what the model is, what the design says, what the blueprints instruct, that is modernity. So when you talk about particular instances like certain brands of feminism or certain attempts to teach certain things or destroy certain kinds of behaviors under the guise of toxic masculinity, these are all instances of this very much larger pattern of I have the idea of how things should be, and I'm going to go mold the world into this idea. Well, one of the things I like to say that gets people riled up sometimes on Twitter, and I kind of repeat it because it gets people riled up, which I didn't anticipate when I first said it. It's kind of amusing to me, is that imagination is overrated. And this is what I'm talking about when I say that. Imagination is overrated. Why? Because you could imagine the most great thing, this, that, the other thing, and now I'm going to make the world conform to my beautiful imagination. And guess what? You always do more harm than good. You always fuck things up. Your imagination is nothing compared to the dimensionality and the complexity of reality. And the only way to get a reality that functions in a healthy way, doesn't just kind of limp along, sick and tired and maybe going to die, but a functional, healthy system, is to work with the bottom-up dynamics of the system, which you'll never understand fully. No single person, institution, model will ever capture it fully. It's impossible. So we have to develop some other way of relating to the world than this sort of modern, scientific, top-down, design-heavy, blueprint-heavy type of approach to thinking about the world. Models are really just models, and it's a cliche to say the map is not the territory, but it should be even more cliche because people haven't gotten it yet.
The map is not the territory. Bottom up versus top down. I'm reminded of a phrase that Jordan Hall taught me: design for emergence. It's sort of like there's a little letting go process, right? It's like I can't actually make all these things do what I want, but I can maybe set the conditions and hope and hope that the thing that we want emerges out of the conditions that we set. So what kind of conditions can we set? What kind of parameters can we tweak? How do we, because you're not just saying give up, right? You're not just saying
No.
we shouldn't give up trying to affect the outcome that we want. What we're saying is we need to take a different approach. And the one where the
Yes.
guy says, do X, Y, Z, because I'm certain that PDQ is going to come out of it, he's wrong. What we need to do is get people. Well, you tell me, what are the parameters? What are the things that we can control? I mean, maybe you need an example, a particular example. I don't know, but like, if we can't set down the blueprint, what can we set down?
So okay, so obviously the answer is going to have to be a bit sprawling, because there's so many things that you might want to design. There's so
Yeah.
many things that might are possible that no one imagined, and things like this. And that's one point that's worth mentioning is part of that. Let me jump back to something else you said. You said it's in some sense has to be a letting go, and I think that's so true. You have to let go of this idea that you can kind of build a thing, build a system by imagining what you want exactly in the future, imagining that itself will be stable or stationary, and then figuring out what all the parts you need are and just getting them together and putting them in place. That's basically the thing that needs to be let go. Um, So when it comes to how do we get what we want, part of the shift has to be that we get a very blurry idea of what we want, that the blurriness is actually an advantage rather than a very crisp image of exactly how it should be in the future. So we start with something very blurry, and we say we want something that's kind of like that, I think. And then you start stepping forward and you build. And when you build in context, in the fullest context you have, that's as similar to the reality you're trying to build in as possible. If it is that reality itself, even better. Like if you're going to build a house, instead of getting out a blank piece of paper and starting to draw a house, you go to where the house is going to sit. You look around. Hey, look, isn't that a nice tree? Isn't that a beautiful pond? Look, oh, the sun's setting over there. And you start to react to the context and build in that context. So you start to develop a sensitivity to those interactions of the thing that you're making and where it's going to hit the world. And because one of the things that's always a bit startling, even for someone like me who's out here evangelizing this stuff, is how even in seemingly non-complex settings, when you don't design in place, little things you didn't think of throw a wrench in all your plans. So like okay, I'm going to build a piece of, this is sort of a dumb example, but just to make the point, I'm going to build this piece of furniture that I really want in my living room. Okay, I spend a month out in the garage putting it together, building it. And then I realize it's all together. It's one big piece. I can't get it through the door. You know, it's shit like that that comes up more often than people would ever expect, because it's just like, oh, there's so many of those little things. There's no way you can account for them all. So that's one piece, is sort of this design in context piece. And as you build things that you didn't think about beforehand, they could be problems, but they also could be things that you like, that you had no idea you didn't. Oh, I didn't know I wanted this, but now that I'm seeing this start to come, this is good. Let's keep going in this direction. This is something that's actually useful or valuable or whatever. So I mean, this is, you know, if you think of like entrepreneurship and kind of startup behavior, this is the proverbial pivot, right? It's like, well, this isn't what we were thinking we were going to do, but now that we see this opportunity, this is a better fit than what we did imagine. So it's just kind of maintaining this agility where you're seeing opportunities as they come up, being open to that you didn't envision them, and adjusting the vision accordingly to the reality. Much harder to do than it sounds. I mean, I've been through a few different situations, startup stuff, where really it was people's inability to let go, to see that their vision wasn't quite the thing, but this other thing is the thing. It's hard for people. And so that's sort of some pieces about the design process. And of course, all of this is iterative, where you're feeding back as much as possible, adjusting as much as possible. Part of that blurry picture up front is that you want wiggle room. So as you discover things, okay, you can shuffle them around a bit, nothing's cemented into place. So you sort of progressively crystallize. Another piece is that we need to think in evolutionary terms. So when you asked, how do you, for instance, avoid things you don't want? Well, you want to set up the thing that you really can design explicitly is the ecosystem through which different designs come in, get tested out in their relevant environments, and either get washed out of the system, no good, get it out of here, or you discover some nice fit somewhere and either multiply those or mutate them and test a little different variation of that. I mean, this is what biological evolution does, and we really need to take a clue from that about how we design things in an indirect way. And that's that letting go. You design indirectly. So someone in that system is designed directly, most likely, maybe not in every case, but most likely, where they might say, well, here's a thing that I think could fit really well. But then the indirect part comes from, well, there's many, many, many of those possible things. There's a large variety of them. And their interactions are part of the selection process, and they can get washed out. And then I know one that you're really keyed into, and I appreciate that you've mentioned me in several places when you're talking about this idea, because I think it's a really crucial idea, and we've been, at least in the political arena, we've been really heavily pressured to not take these ideas seriously and think about them hard, but is the kind of boundary conditions of entry and exit of different agents into a system. So when you look at biological systems, again, you see that at all scales, from the sort of subcellular, cellular, or in multicellular organisms, organ systems, the organism itself, groups of organisms, ecosystems, pieces of ecosystems, at every scale that I'm mentioning here and others. What you have are very explicitly constructed boundaries. Now, those might be physical boundaries, walls, things like that. They might be virtual boundaries, informational. Let me see your ID. That's a virtual boundary, right? We need to get comfortable with the fact that all of life depends on these boundaries being selectively permeable, so that this boundary itself is making the decision what comes in and what's allowed in here, what's in and what's out. And actually, it's the pattern of life itself that generates that distinction of inside versus outside. And that is something that, to me, it's a tragedy that there's any kind of political stigma to this idea that there's an inside and an outside of every system. And that's not only okay, it's necessary. Just imagine what does happen when you get a bad cut. Okay, you've got a boundary break situation, and now you go put your hand into some dirty water, and dirty water gets in, and what's happened? You got an infection. You've got something to deal with now. Now, hopefully your system's up to the task. If it's not, well, goodbye. So this distinction between inside and outside and being a bit exclusive is necessary to life.
It's
And those are some things. I'm sure there's more we could hit on that I
Yeah,
missed, but
no, definitely. I mean, what's interesting about the boundary thing is, politically speaking, you got some people on the left that try to act like there should be no boundaries. We should not be selective about who permeates the boundaries. But then the first reaction nationwide to the COVID was socially distance yourself from other people. Oh, what we did? We're just creating boundaries between us and other people. And it's fascinating how sometimes when life is on the line in this particular instance, as it was perceived to be or may have been, oh, let's do this thing because we know we know that it's important to set up a boundary. So much of what you said resonated with me in general. I mean, I'm getting a sense where you like rigidity is penalized, fluidity is rewarded, right? Being able to react and react, being able to iterate, being able to implement an OODA loop as an observe, orient, decide, and act. In the liminal order, we like to act first because sometimes it's the easiest way to figure out what's going on. It reminds me of trading emerging market sovereign debt, which is what I did in the late 90s. And it was such an obscure asset class that there was only a handful of people around the world that were actually trading these things. So the way we would figure out what was going on with the markets is you get into the office and you put out a sell offer. You don't even know why. You're just putting it out there on the line to see who's taking, to see who's biting, to see who's biting at what price, as a way to get information. You act first, then get your information, and then you can understand what environment you're working in. And
well, it makes me think. It reminds me of it's just very visceral because it's like we think these things are kind of like only an informational space or something, but it's different for us. There's these old vision experiments that they ran where they actually paralyzed people's muscles so they couldn't move their eyes back and forth. And what happens then? You go blind.
Interesting.
So you in a very real way, every observation demands that there's an action associated with it. That's actually what it means to perceive. You're always active. You're an active agent. You're always probing. There's no passive perception. That's sort of an illusion that we've become comfortable with, and that's actually part of this, from a scientific standpoint. This modernism's tendency to see things in isolation and believe that they are those things in isolation. Perception and action are actually one thing. We can talk about the two aspects of it, but they're not separate things, and they never can be. You take one away, you take the other away. They come together, they go together. So just to put another point on that yeah, indeed. And I mean, I think that's I'm not a Boyd scholar, but I believe that's why it's a loop, right? It's because it's really one thing. There's no beginning or end of the loop.
Right. You don't just stop at observe.
Right.
Although that's part of our sort of modern plague, and part of like our perfectionist tendency is to want to observe, and like, oh, I gotta wait until I get this thing perfect before I can take action. And I'll give you a concrete example in my life right now. We're planning our brunch tour, which coincides with the Liminal Order tour as well. And we're trying to figure out where we're going around the country and having social events for people, men on Saturday night, families and wives and everybody on Sundays. And we are we're trying to just predict what 100 people are going to do from different parts of the country at different times, and we're trying to like structure the perfect program and the perfect pricing, the perfect everything. Finally, we're like, you know what, let's just throw something out there, see how people respond, and adjust accordingly. And as soon as we decided to do that and the data started coming back this way, it made everything so much easier. So this is a good lesson for you guys, anybody out there who's like trying to think, oh, I'm going to start a business, or oh, I'm going to write a book, or oh, I'm going to do, just get going, start small, take small risks at first, but get going. I think it's been proven that if you ship at 80%, which is our motto inside the LO as well, all of our updates to the Liminal Order, all of our new initiatives, they're all come out at 80%. They're never 100% finished, because we have found that like if you ship at 80% and then iterate on your feedback and then ship at 80% again, and then iterate again and ship at 80% again, over the same timeline, you get to a far better destination than if you just waited right here to figure out 100% certainty to move forward. So there's definitely
Absolutely. I mean, there's not even such thing as 100%.
right, right. And
It
so
doesn't even exist. So
eighty
like,
percent is
yeah,
illusory anyway, right?
right, exactly. So it's exactly right. You got like the faster you can loop, and that was Boyd's insight. Wasn't that um, was that the speed of the OODA loop is what really counted, as opposed to the quality of the a slow cycle. Now I know John Robb has some differences in that he thinks the quality is really important, this and that. But I nevertheless, Boyd has a strong point here that what we really need to do is speed this thing up, because let's do 100 loops while you do one. Well, we're way the hell ahead of you, even if we're goofy.
Right, right, exactly right. And that's the philosophy we've taken inside the LO. And one of the commenters, Ivan, right now says basically software development architecture principles in real life. Absolutely. And what is getting me so juiced about this subject complexity is seeing and these discussions that we're talking about here, and then learning more. I'm not a software guy, but learning more about the way software development oftentimes reflects these principles in a much more illustrative way than any other industry that I've seemingly come across. So I'm like learning these concepts, repeating them back to guys in LO that are in software, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's just kind of how you do it." And like to see how they're all connected. We're talking about these instances in biology, in physics, in chemistry, in computer science, in our social lives, in our communities, in politics, in corona response, but we're seeing them all underlying with these certain principles, which are about the interactions of things, which is what I've come to understand. My very layman's understanding of this is that the rules and laws of complexity seem to be below the rules and laws of physics and chemistry and biology, in that like complexity applies to each of those spheres in a way that they don't apply across to each other. We're getting off on a tangent here, but am I kind of right in that perception?
I love tangents. No, yeah, exactly right. And that's why one of the hallmarks of you go look at, what do people publish in complex system science? It's often like, here's a model of fluids that's working well for like understanding how sheep move or something, right?
Yeah.
It's like, because what you're looking at, because you're looking directly at the patterns themselves, the stuff that fulfills the patterns can vary. The same pattern can be fulfilled by many different particular systems. Now, you can go too far with that, where you think because there's a nice analogy between two systems, a nice sort of formal analogy, that it will hold under all conditions, and then you start making predictions and directives and things, and that can go wrong. But nevertheless, that is one of the keys, is that certain things can behave like certain other things that seem completely different. They're made of totally different things. They're in different departments. Like this is in biology, this is in physics. But because they're patterns, you can talk about how they're related to one another and what it is about these things that makes them behave the same. And the answer is always, well, their interactions are similar or the same among the parts that compose the system. And so indeed, and yeah, and with respect to the software development and the fact that these are principles that are known in software development, yes. But I will say, I've been disappointed that more software developers don't see that these are principles that apply writ large. They'll kind of do this thing. There's domain dependence of their knowledge. Well, they'll say, well, now I'm not doing software anymore, so this doesn't apply anymore. But nope, still applies. So yeah, it's a big picture thing for sure.
What's fascinating in some respects about this is like my instinct is to want to have everything be perfect before I start. It's to want to never fail, right? Like, especially when I was younger, failure was like the worst possible thing. Failure. I failed. God. But now I totally understand that failure is an essential part of success. Failure is information. Failure is progress. I welcome failure. A great example, when I very first started trying to make any money online, I launched a coaching business, and guess what I got? I got out of it. Zero. But
$0.
$0, zero clients, $0, because I didn't know what I was doing at all, and but I just tried, and then I was like, oh well, maybe I need to tweak this thing. Then I need to tweak this thing. It seems like there is an instinctive human nature to not want to fail in some ways. I can see it in my son. I can see it in my daughter. I can see it in my kids. They don't want to fail. They think failing is bad. But when you take all the things that we're talking about together, you realize failure is the wrong fucking word. It's just more information, additional information, more observation, more orientation to help you make a better decision and have a better action and reaction. Interesting to see how it may or may not line up with human nature.
So, oh, interesting. I was going to say, I think one thing that we need to differentiate is what you're calling failure and then ruin. The thing to avoid is not failure, but ruin. Ruin means you can't get back out. It's over. Ruin for a person is you die. Ruin for your finances is you go to zero. Now, of course, there's bankruptcy and things like that, and those things are exactly designed to take something that might be ruinous and turn it into just failure. Now, how is it with or against human nature? Now, that's really interesting. My sense is that a lot of our kind of perfectionism and analysis paralysis is another consequence of modernity. We start hanging out with, say, farmers or homesteaders, people who have to get shit done one way or another by the end of the day. Doesn't matter. No one but them is going to check up on it. But the sheep got to be in the barn, something like that. You find that there is none of that. There's just, I'm going to take this action. All right, now I see why that was stupid. Now I'm going to take this action. Okay, that was a little less stupid. That's looking pretty good. And you just do, and you stop. And that's been, for me personally, one of the things that I've gotten out of adopting this lifestyle is to be, I suffer much less analysis paralysis than I used to. Now, it still happens to me, but I actually there's a feeling associated with it kind of in my gut. And I can kind of catch myself doing it. And I say, fuck, just get out there. Just like literally just like hammer the nail, do something. Yeah. Like, okay, the whole thing falls down. Okay, well, now that's a stupid way to do it. So again, I don't know, human nature, that's a big,
yeah.
I think that it's actually with human nature to kind of try and fail. And modernity gives us this perfectionism, and it's against our nature, I think. And
Great point.
What's happening, probably a bit of what's happening is that we're confusing failure and ruin. Like, oh no, it's gonna, like, think about, like, you're young, you want to talk to the hot girl, and you're like, oh, I just can't do it. Oh my God. Oh, and you're like psyching yourself up like you're gonna fucking die if this girl tells you you're a loser or whatever. Like, when it doesn't matter at all. So I think this confusion of failure and ruin is huge, and it's an emotional thing.
Like, the motto should be, fuck it, let's see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Fuck it, let's try. Except for systemic risk of ruin. Right. That's like, because like, this is the stuff where like GMO agriculture, it's like, oh, but think of all the benefits you might have. But it's like, you're fucking with ecosystems in a way that's irreversible. Ecosystem goes to ruin state, you're screwed. So it's fuck it, let's see what happens, conditional on it's not a ruin risk. It's a different
being
kind of risk.
Localized even.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right? There you go. Absolutely. Which is why barriers and boundaries and selectively passable lines are important, because it enables risk taking, right?
Yes.
Which enables mutation, right? Which can evolve into something very positive. Which is another reason why you want to have a federalist system with states and localities trying things out, rather than the federal government just blasting things straight down on top of all of us.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, we can get there, but okay. I mean, it's true. I mean, it's a system, right? It's a decent, conceivably it could be a totally decentralized system. It can be one that has localized areas for risk taking, which allow the best thing to percolate up to the top. It's another reason why we need to have masculinity and femininity, because those things are different and they need to be localized and separate. There's all kinds of great reasons as to why
localized, but not isolated.
Right.
I believe the yin yang symbol, as played out as that was from the 90s, I think is really a beautiful thing in its visual representation of that idea. Two very distinct things, totally interlocked, somehow symmetric while being different, and with one another kind of sitting at their own center in an almost paradoxical way. Like, that's complexity. That's masculinity and femininity. And again, we've gotten this sense that differentiation is synonymous with isolation, but actually keeping things connected is what allows them to differentiate.
Connectivity is different than isolate. Localization is different than isolation.
Yes.
Very interesting to see what this means in terms of pluralities of politics, pluralities of religious practices, pluralities of cultures. The plurality is what allows us to have these experiments and then have the best one come up. Monoculture, as you talked about in your tweet, was the destruction. What did you say? Oh, I lost it
I
already.
call it a monofunctional machine, and that's what I
Monofunctional
was.
machine.
Yeah, what I was referring to there is what I described earlier. Like, you think you found the function of this thing, and so now you're gonna like double down on this is what this thing does, but you're not realizing all its other relationships and other subtle, at least subtle from that perspective, functionalities that it's enabling. Um, yeah.
Let's talk about practice for me. This was one thing that you wanted to talk to me about. I have a blurry image of dudes doing well together, or we rise to do the work of men, or brothers are stronger together than apart. That's the blurry image of the liminal order. There's no way to map out step by step every which way to get to this particular destination. But what we started with is a boundary. Let's just start with a boundary. If you're in, you're in. If you're out, you're out. And we decided that the boundary is going to have conditions for you to pass through, for you to decide whether you're in or out. We kind of decide if you're in or out. And if you're in, you're in. If you're out, you're out. So now that you're in, how am I going to use complex system analysis, applied complexity here to get this blurry outcome that I want, when really what we're taking is, like, right now we got 700 guys. We're taking 700 guys, we're putting them inside this boundary. And then we have certain parameters and certain ideas and things that we can tweak, but we're talking about real people now. Now, I took Joe's applied complexity class, and I sat there and I watched as he created these models, and he changed the parameter on this, and the speed at which this thing did that, and the rate at which this thing passed information to the other, and the rate at which they would replicate or they would die, or how long one could stay open or whatever. And by tweaking those parameters, the blurry picture became much more defined, and the pattern emerged, and there was the thing that emerged out of the interactions, and you set the stage of the interactions, or the conditions for the interactions. Now, what a complex system, men in a community. It's complex. We don't know what's going to happen. It's the interactions between the things that make the thing become the real thing. I'm going to ask you, you can ask me, let's have a talk here. How do we convert these concepts that in computer science and in data and whatnot that are very easy to manipulate? How do we convert them into human things? Or what has historically been ways that we do that? How do we control the parameters? How do we, like, socially? You see what I'm getting at? Like, for example, like culture. Culture, I guess, is a technology that helps set the parameters of the things that are functioning within the complex system to get the blurry picture of, like, harmony or
Right.
progress or whatever.
Right.
Help me explore this idea when we've got a barrier, and we've got men, and we've got a blurry picture. What are the various things that we can tweak in order to get to the outcome that we want?
Well, clearly, I mean, and obviously part of what you've been doing is a piece of that is, okay, once you're inside the boundary, what is our source of connectivity? How do we actually interact with one another? Are those primarily dyadic interactions, sort of one-on-one? Are those somehow group interactions? Are these all online? Are they in person? Who comes up with the new ideas of what to do next, and how do those get fed back into the system? How is either buy-in to those ideas facilitated or otherwise? How is something that's perceived as a bad idea flushed out of the system? So I mean, these are the kind of parameters I see in the kind of social network that you're talking about. And I know. Why don't you tell me what have you been playing with, and what have you perceived to be working and not working?
So one of the things that we have problem with in LO is discoverability. We have so much information and so many good things happening and so many amazing initiatives and so many amazing projects and so many amazing guys that what we have trouble doing is highlighting and surfacing these great things for everyone to observe and then participate with. So from your class, I remember very clearly you showing like the random ants going all over the place looking for food,
Yep.
going all over. They're
Yep.
going all crazy. They're just seemingly random going all over. One of them finds a piece of food, goes right back to the nest and leaves a trail. And then the other ants are doing their random thing and they come across the trail and they're like, oh, snap. And then they go to the food and then they go right back. And before you know it, this random map of ants is now just a straight line from the nest to the food, nest to the food, and back and forth. So I took that idea and we turned that into a cultural piece, a meme, mythology. We call it Breadcrumbs Are Brotherhood. Okay. So we say this all the time. Breadcrumbs are brotherhood. Breadcrumbs are brotherhood. What does that mean? It means if you come across something interesting, fascinating that other people need to know about, make it a point to return to the nest and tell everybody about it. And we've
Yep.
actually found just by saying breadcrumbs are brotherhood, we take this notion that I learned in your class, these true scientific principles about complexity, we've turned them into language and then into social behavior that has then resulted in additional information being surfaced and more good things happening within the organization. So that's one example. I would like to learn 50,000 more of those so that we can continue to fine tune this thing. So like I don't know what kind of parameter that is, right? I don't know what kind of tweak that was, but it was directly taken from your class and I directly applied it through this method and it's directly having positive outcome.
Mhm.
What else can we do? How else can we do this?
So one thing is again, I always look to biological systems to kind of inspire these things. And one thing is this kind of idea of coopetition. So obviously you have competition, you have cooperation, both happen in ecosystems. Sometimes two agents are both either at the same time or at different times cooperating versus competing. Think about a sports team at practice versus game time. You might actually compete at practice with your teammates. So you're competing against your teammates, but then you get to the game time and now you're cooperating with your teammates. One thing about competition is it has this amazing kind of psychological energy to it. So winning in a competition can be like its own reward, even if there's no, say monetary reward attached to it. Obviously, if you have some external incentive, that can be great, but competition by itself can be its own reward. So setting up things where you're actually explicitly competing to achieve some more or less blurry outcome can drive a lot of innovation, a lot. Now, how do you decide who's won, this and that, the other thing? Those are all details we worked out in a specific context. But that would be one place where I would say, and we're talking about brotherhood here. So you got a lot of testosterone, a lot of dudes who would relish the competition. So I would say that's something that LO should absolutely be leveraging as an additional kind of parameter to tweak. Is what are the means of competition and potentially cooperation, either in the context of those competitions or otherwise. Now, I think you said discoverability, and that's obviously a hugely important one to a sprawling information space. So, I think, as I was saying before, I really think that these kind of emerging networks, LO being a beautiful example of one, are going to have to reckon sooner than later with the fact that localized communities where people are interacting in the flesh are they have a kind of advantage and possibility space that you just can't get if your connections are only virtual. So as far as discoverability goes, I think, and I know that LO has done some work on this, but a really kind of figuring out who's where and who's around, what are the kind of possibilities of those local clusters, and all the way to and I think this has even happened, but all the way to the point of people getting up and moving so that they're closer with one another, so that they're in a place that's more in line with their values, around people that share their values, et cetera. Writ large, I think that's what we are seeing happening in the U.S., and we should be encouraging it. Like, yes, you love California, then go to California, stay there. You love New Hampshire, then come on up and stay here. Like, we need to organize so that our values are aligned, and our lifestyles are aligned, so we're not at one another's throats all the time. Back to the LO and parameter setting and tweaking there. It's just the fact that and you see this on, as you move from social media platforms, like across them, and feel the different feelings they all have. Like Twitter has a different feel than Facebook, and Facebook has a different feel than Instagram. So this is the point where on the digital side of things, the very particular details of the infrastructure and the way they facilitate interactions has a huge impact on like what actually comes out of those. So for LO, I would also be playing heavily with that. I know there's a few. I know you do that again. You have like there's a forum and there's the chat app and all that, and they facilitate different kinds of interactions. I think one piece that could potentially step things forward is to like soak that in. Like, first of all, maybe what's a technology that's just not good, flush it out. What is the different kind of functions that these facilitate versus one another, and then focus on, like you said, with the sort of the cultural mythology, focusing on getting the culture to use those tools for what they're strong for and not for other stuff. And probably in the case of LO, there's some custom type of interfaces that could be built to really flesh out where it's obvious that, oh, if we could just do this, that would be great, but none of the kind of off the shelf things facilitate that. So,
well, that's why the liminal order.
If you want to talk about, offline, we can definitely talk about that too.
Well, dude, the liminal order is not only a community; it is a tech company because we're trying to we're trying to solve this problem. Once we solve these problems, then we're going to have a very valuable product on our hands. There's no question about that.
That's very true.
When we have been trying to get people to move, to do things, and I don't mean locations, which has happened, but I just mean to take certain actions, we're realizing that story and mythology has a huge part in it. And what has been really exciting for me is to see how, like, why has mythology evolved in human society? And then now I understand a little bit about complexity, and now I understand a little bit about actually managing communities. And it's to get the ants to go where you want them to go. I mean, and to transmit that information that was back then and to send it into the future. It's a time travel mechanism to send what you learned back then into the future through mythology, through story. And we work on that by telling stories all the time and repeating things that people did well, how they did that. In order to incentivize and induce people to do sort of the same thing. Now, we have multiple modes of communication. We have the instant message apps that we use. We've got the long form forum that we use. We use Zoom and video chat. We do local in-person casual meetups. We do regional, more formal meetups. We've had national meetups. So we're trying to hit every sort of mode of communication, see which ones produce the best results. In person always produces the best results. It always gets us closer to the blurry image of dudes doing well together or rising to do the work of men. We have definitely experienced that, like, the Zoom stuff is awesome and it has had tremendous results. But the magic, the real magic of the Liminal Order comes when people get together and break bread and have some drinks and like do things, activities together, build things together. Men need an activity usually instead of just sitting around gossiping. And it's like, it's more fun and more productive that way. And we're learning. One of the things that I have observed, which is fascinating, is like our technology shaping our culture, right? And as we add more people, the technology's own limitations are limiting the culture that is developing, which is limiting the outcomes which happen, which are limiting our impact on families and communities and on the nation. And so two things that we're really focused on are signal to noise ratio. Are you putting out signal into the network or are you putting noise into the network? Ask yourself this question. So along with breadcrumbs or brotherhood, we ask signal to noise, preserved signal to noise ratio. And we describe it as this: the bigger the room, the higher the ratio, smaller the room, the lower the ratio. If you're just in a group with 5 guys, you can just be putting out all kinds of fucking noise. You could just be like sending memes and talking shit and saying that you burped or whatever. But if you're in a big room, everything that you say should be high value to everyone. And so signal to noise ratio and then network bottlenecks, right? So that's when you just got too many people in one place trying to squeeze through a little hole. So what do? We distribute the flow of people. This is why we went to a cohort system instead of having everybody into one group. Now we put them into cohorts of 150, and there's less of a network bottleneck there. because we're also trying to capture the power, the network power, right? The power of an increasing size of a network, which is not linear. It's not 1+1. It's each person's then connection to every other person in the network increases opportunities and possibilities. And so I've just had this very revelatory experience of like using network science, complex science to create culture, mythology, and human behavior, and then see how all of our regular human culture and mythology and experiences are solving the same problems pre-technology, pre-communication, pre all of that, and to see how they're all united and aligned and have similar properties has been blowing my mind, dude. So I don't have a question.
No, that's beautiful stuff. And like when you talk about these 150 kind of sub networks, I mean, beautiful Dunbar's number. There you go.
Yep.
And I mean, this is digital localism. This is like, okay, well, we're not gonna develop these. My sense is that what we've lost by becoming very sprawled in our interaction, tight loops, this tight circularity. And it's really the loops that make things alive. It's like where things feed back on themselves in some way or another. And so when you have a smallish network, those cycles are going to emerge very rapidly. And on a very large network, they might be in there somewhere, but it's this kind of convoluted path, and you don't get that visceral sense of like closeness with the loops themselves. And like one of the reasons that I'm really adamant about like sort of economic localism is for reasons just like this. Imagine that I spend $100 on food. Now I either go to Walmart, do that, and the $100 goes somewhere, and sure, someone gets paid locally, they get a wage or whatever, but then the rest of that money is going on to the world, and it goes somewhere, and something happens, and maybe eventually it kind of comes back around, and I experience the impact of that. But contrast that with I go to my neighbor down the street who has a farm. I buy $100 worth of food from him, and then he takes that $100 and like fixes the front of his house or something. Now I immediately have an impact. Now I take a walk down the street and his house looks better and our neighborhood looks better. And there's this like positive externality thing happening where like my house is now worth more money because I paid that guy $100. So these kind of loops, this circularity, you have to keep the system size constrained to get that. Now you can have a larger meta system, but it has to be built up of these smaller systems that have some boundary around them that allow that circularity to emerge. So that was the thought you spurred in me when you said that. There's something else, but I lost it now.
I'm starting to feel very good about our choices here, because not only do we have the big network, then we break people up into their cohorts, so it's an entry network. Then we break people up into regional and local networks, and some of them are more popular. Like, for example, our Southeast room is just banging, like 500 messages a day. People are literally moving from other areas of the LO into Southeast region, especially Central and Eastern Tennessee. They've set up a whole welcome package for people coming to Tennessee. They've got the local broker, they've got the beef broker, they've got the chicken broker, they've got guys that will come, LO members, all these guys that will come put up your fences and pens for you the day that you move in. Like, they've really, in Southeast, right? But Northeast, not as active, right? It's fascinating to see. And so we're keeping people in small groups, and a little bit bigger, and then a little bit bigger. And then we cross-sect them by interest, by profession. So we've got the academics of the Liminal Order, we've got the military men of the Liminal Order, etc. So there's another part of their social graph there, and we have found that when we make sure people get into small groups, that their experience is better. The blurry picture is better, rather than dumping them into one spot with 700 guys where you would just get completely lost. And I didn't know any of this shit when we started, okay? All I knew was that feminism bad, masculinity good. What are we going to do? Let's do it together. Blurry picture, dudes doing well together. And because I didn't sit around and wait to have all the perfect answers and we took action, we've now been able to evolve this into a thing that's highly functioning at this point. Highly functioning. Doors are open right now if you guys want to join. Liminal-order.com. And talking to you and learning your class and learning your information and then seeing this application all together is giving me much it's a big boost. It's a lot of wind in my sails because if what we're doing not only fits culturally and it has the outcome that we want, but then we're using these scientific concepts in order to facilitate the social and community outcome that we want. That's really remarkable. I feel an alignment that's feels solid instead of wishy washy or uncertain or weak.
Yeah, totally, man. Yeah, no, you are facilitating the generation of these natural, spontaneous patterns, and that's the idea. And my guess is if you went and looked, why is the Southeast looking different than the Northeast? There's probably one or two people, if you went and kind of tracked the history of it, that really were like the spark plug, and then they acted like a nucleus and sort of nucleated this whole thing around. And that's not to say that they drove it, but that's like real leadership, right? It's not about telling everyone what to do exactly. It's about like setting the conditions for things to nucleate around you a bit. And probably there's something that could be I was going to say replicated, but I would almost that sounds too exact copy, but sort of lessons learned, I guarantee could be pulled out of the Southeast and applied to other regions and say, hey, look what worked here. Let's see what we can do to set those conditions elsewhere. And that's a beautiful thing. And you told me about the folks getting together and setting up pens and fences and stuff, and that's incredible because that is real life. There's nothing that's more real life than that. Setting up the conditions to sustain yourself and your family in a literal sense. I mean, if you want a brotherhood for anything, that's it. So
Dude,
kudos to you for allowing that to happen.
My goosebumps just came up because I'm going to tell you a quick story, and it's a beautiful thing, and it's one of the best stories in the LO in that it encapsulates so many different things. And we've got 1,000 of these stories. Okay. We got a guy join us from Oregon, from Portland, and he had a family of 3. There were 5 of them in Portland. He hated living there, sicko, crazy Portland. And he's like, he joined the LO. He's like, guys, I got to get out of here. What should I do? Where should I go? What's a good place to live? Guys in the Southeast, they're like, come over to the Southeast, go to the Southeast. And because they had set up this energy with the gravitational pull, and I guess Central and Eastern Tennessee is pretty lit as it is. I'll be going there later this year. They decided to move to Tennessee. And again, they got a referral from a broker to buy the land. Then they got a referral from the cattle guy. They bought their cattle. They bought their chickens. And then all of the guys in the area were the ones that came to his house and in one day did the fencing and the penning. This is one story in the Liminal Order that has been facilitated by all these concepts we're talking about. And it seems so technical and nerdy to talk about the technology and the complexity and the parameters and the barriers and the rate of communication and the method of communication and the discoverability and It seems so nerdy to talk about all this stuff. But that blurry image really crystallized with this guy from Oregon and his family. And the part at the end of the story that made it so great is not only he's starting a new business because he had to move. He started a new business, picked up some customers from inside the LO, got enough of a runway from guys inside the LO that when he had another client exhibiting wokeism on him, asking questions about his company, are you woke? Do you do this? What about diversity? What about that? He was able to say, you know what? I don't want your business. I don't want your business.
Powerful to be able to say no, man. That's power. That's power.
That is power. And that power to say no, that sovereignty to say no, came from his participation in this network and all these guys contributing and his commitment to his own sovereignty and his food sovereignty and having food growing on his land and his own water and moving his family out of a bad place and into a place that has such power for him. I'm looking at Joe, looking at me very pensively. He wasn't moving. Are you back?
Yeah. I was starting to glitch out there a bit.
It glitched out for a second.
I wasn't sure if it was going down. Seems
no,
like
we're here. We're here. So one thing you said that was really powerful that I'm going to emphasize is emphasizing leadership. We've done that too. We've put 50 people through a specialized training program on leadership in order to facilitate this kind of thing. And you're right. I'm going to look in. I know that there was a handful of guys in this spot and a handful of guys in that cohort and a handful of guys in this cohort that really make it happen. So how am I going to make more of those guys happen? That's a really good piece for me to focus on. All right. That's a lot of specific talk about the LO, but the reason why I wanted to talk about it was to show a real world application in the soft world, a human world of not very many clearly defined answers, that this sort of scientific approach can be applied, and really all of our culture and mythology and legend and stories and cliches and old sayings and wives' tales and whatever, they were all part of the same concept, which is trying to breadcrumbs for everybody on how to get to that food that we are already found. My mind's a little blown.
And that itself, those myths themselves evolve as well, right? Like
Yeah,
the breadcrumbs for brotherhood. That's one that that's a sticky. That's nice. Other ones you might try, and it doesn't really work, and you let it go.
totally. Totally.
Yeah,
That one stuck. Alliteration. Democrat to deplorable.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. So,
Legit.
yeah, you would love that. Joe, man, thank you so much for your time, dude. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
We've covered so many subjects. We didn't even get to the slamming of libertarianism, which I was hoping we might get to. Another day, another day. Congratulations on being a man of action, putting your money where your mouth is, doing the thing that you believe, embodiment. You are embodying your values, Joe, and I respect you a tremendous amount for that. And being able to embody your values in this world is basically the ultimate goal. We're restricted in so many ways, from even identifying your values, being able to foster them, being able to think about acting on, or even knowing that you can act on them, and then actually acting on them, and then actually succeeding at it. That is like, man, hats off to you, dude. I respect that a lot. You're a true leader in that regard, and I hope more people will get turned on to you and your content and your message because of this conversation, Joe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend. Wow, that was quite a. I'm blushing. So I really appreciate that, man. Likewise, right back at you. I got nothing but respect for you, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Joe. Where can people find you? Remind them how they can sign up for your class and they can get some more of this amazing knowledge, which has proven to be hugely valuable to me.
Sure. So obviously on Twitter, my Twitter's up there, Normonics. And then the website is appliedcomplexity.io. That's where information about the courses. And yeah, just find me on one of those. And I think you can get to my email through there. And just happy to chat too. So.
All right, let's do it, guys. If you're interested, participate in a bespoke educational experience for yourself. Pick and choose what you want to learn from experts all around the world. This is the new way of teaching, of education. Michael Millerman doing very much the same thing with his philosophy classes as well, too. Check him out, michaelmillerman.ca, I believe. Guys, thank you very much. If you enjoyed this, which I know you did, share it, like, retweet, put it on Twitter, send it in an email, send it over Facebook. We got to beat the algorithms. You know they're suppressing everybody and everything worth a shit out there. Post it all over the place if you can. That's the best way to support us right now. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And until the next time, guys, we're out of here. Peace.